The gunshot shattered the silence of the hospital corridor before anyone understood what had happened. And Dr. Elias Varon stood frozen with blood spraying across the pale green wall behind the nurse who had been speaking to him only a second earlier. Her sentence dying in her throat as her body collapsed against the medicine cart, the metal trays clattering across the floor, while a man at the far end of the hallway lowered a pistol and stared directly at Elias with an expression that was disturbingly calm, almost disappointed, as if the doctor had failed some invisible test. Elias did not move at first. His brain refused to process the sound, the smell, the sudden presence of death. Then instinct surged through him, and he lunged toward the nurse, kneeling beside her. "Stay with me. Stay with me," he whispered, pressing his hands against the wound in her chest, even though he could already feel the emptiness beneath her skin. Her eyes stared past him, glassy and confused. Footsteps thundered in the stairwell behind the gunman. Someone shouted. The man with the pistol did not run. He only watched Elias, tilting his head slightly as if studying him. Then he slipped the weapon into his coat and disappeared through the emergency exit before security could reach the corridor. The nurse died 30 seconds later, with Elias still holding her hand. 2 hours after the shooting, Detective Mara Kessler leaned against the cold metal table in the hospital conference room and watched Elias as he tried to answer questions that sounded simple but felt like accusations. "You're saying he didn't say anything?" she asked. "Not a word," Elias replied quietly. His voice felt hollow in his own ears. "He just looked at you?" Mara asked. "Yes. Like he knew you?" Elias hesitated. He remembered the man's expression, that strange disappointment. "I don't know," he said. Mara studied him for a long moment. She had spent 12 years interrogating people, and she recognized the small fractures in a person's composure when memory collided with fear. "Dr. Varon," she said carefully. The shooter walked past 3 other staff members to reach that corridor. He didn't threaten anyone else. He didn't take anything. The nurse he shot had no connection to any criminal investigation, so I need to ask you something directly. Elias met her gaze. "Do you believe that man was there for you?" The question hung in the room like another gunshot. Elias opened his mouth to answer, but a memory flickered behind his eyes before the words could form. 5 years earlier, rain had been hammering the windows of a small coastal clinic where Elias had once worked during a volunteer program that most of his colleagues had forgotten about. Most, but not all. The patient on the operating table that night had been a young man with a bullet lodged near his spine. The police were already searching the town. Elias knew it before the man even spoke. "You remove the bullet," the patient had whispered through clenched teeth, "and you forget you ever saw me." Elias had refused at first. "You need a hospital," he told the man. "I need someone who won't ask questions," the man replied. Their eyes met across the harsh surgical light. Elias saw desperation, fear, and something else beneath it. Loyalty to someone dangerous. Elias should have called the police. Instead, he performed the surgery. He told himself he was saving a life. He told himself it was a moral choice. But when the man woke hours later, he said something Elias had never been able to forget. One day, the patient murmured weakly, "Someone will ask about this night. When they do, doctor, remember that you chose my side." The memory snapped away as Mara's voice pulled Elias back into the present. "Dr. Varon?" she said. "You drifted off for a moment." Elias rubbed his temples. "I'm just tired," he said. Mara nodded slowly, though she did not look convinced. "We're pulling security footage from the building," she explained. "If the shooter returns, we'll know who he is." Elias felt a tight pressure in his chest. He wondered if the man from the corridor was the same man from the operating table 5 years ago. The thought made his stomach turn. Across the city, inside a dark apartment overlooking the harbor, the man who had fired the gun sat quietly at a kitchen table, while another man poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "You missed your target," the second man said, without looking up. The shooter shrugged slightly. "I adjusted the plan." "That wasn't the plan." "Plans change." The second man placed the whiskey on the table and finally turned around. His face was lined with years of quiet violence. "Do you understand what kind of mess you just created?" he asked. The shooter leaned back in his chair. "Yes," he said calmly. "I do." "Then explain it to me." The shooter picked up the glass but did not drink. "The doctor needed to see me. You could have walked into his office." "No," the shooter replied. "I needed him to remember." The second man studied him carefully. "You're certain he will?" The shooter finally took a sip of whiskey. "Oh yes," he said softly. "He remembers everything." The next morning, Elias tried to resume his routine as if the hospital corridor had not become a crime scene overnight. Patients filled the waiting rooms. Nurses whispered to one another in quiet clusters. Security guards now stood near every entrance, but the rhythm of the hospital felt broken. People glanced at Elias when they thought he wasn't looking. Some of them knew he had been present when the nurse died. Others knew the police had questioned him for nearly 3 hours. In his office, Elias sat staring at the X-ray images on his computer screen without actually seeing them. His phone vibrated suddenly on the desk. The number displayed no caller ID. He hesitated before answering. "Hello?" For a moment, there was only silence on the line. Then a voice spoke quietly. "You did a very clean job with the spinal extraction." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. The voice continued. 5 years ago, coastal clinic. Heavy rain. You told me I might lose the use of my legs." Elias gripped the edge of the desk. "Who is this?" he demanded, though he already knew. The voice ignored the question. "You also told me that saving a life always matters," the man said. "Do you still believe that?" Elias forced himself to breathe. "You killed someone yesterday," he said. "You don't get to ask me philosophical questions." The voice chuckled softly. "Ah," the man replied, "but that's exactly why I called." Elias closed his eyes. "What do you want?" There was a pause. When the man spoke again, his tone carried a quiet gravity that made Elias's skin crawl. "I want you to finish what you started." Detective Mara Kessler stood in the hospital security office watching the surveillance footage frame by frame. The camera angle showed the shooter entering through the emergency stairwell 15 minutes before the gunshot. His face remained partially obscured by shadow, but his movements were deliberate and unhurried. Mara paused the footage and zoomed in on a small detail. The man wore a hospital visitor badge clipped to his coat, but the name printed on the badge was visible for only a single blurred frame. She leaned closer to the monitor. The letters were almost unreadable. Almost. "E. Varon," she murmured. Behind her, Officer Lynn frowned. "That's the doctor's name." Mara nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "It is." Later that afternoon, Mara walked into Elias's office without knocking. Elias looked up from his desk in surprise. "Detective?" She placed a printed photograph on the desk in front of him. It showed the blurred security frame. "Explain this," she said. Elias studied the image. His heart began to race. The visitor badge in the photograph clearly displayed his own name. "I didn't give anyone a badge," he said immediately. Mara folded her arms. "I didn't say you did," she replied. "But someone wanted the cameras to think the shooter belonged here." Elias leaned back in his chair, exhausted. "You think I'm involved," he said quietly. Mara did not answer right away. Instead, she watched his face carefully. "I think," she said finally, "that someone from your past just walked into a hospital, murdered a nurse, and made sure every piece of evidence pointed toward you." Elias stared at the photograph again. A cold realization began forming in his mind. "He called me," Elias said. Mara's eyes sharpened instantly. "When?" "An hour ago." "And?" Elias hesitated. The words felt heavy in his mouth. He said, "I need to finish what I started." Mara stepped closer to the desk. "Finish what?" Elias looked up at her, and for the first time since the shooting, his voice trembled. "Saving his life." Mara's expression shifted from suspicion to something darker. "You saved that man before?" Elias nodded slowly. Silence filled the office. Then Mara asked the question that changed everything. "Do you know who he works for?" Elias shook his head. Mara slid another photograph onto the desk. This one showed a different man. Older, colder, with eyes that seemed carved from stone. "His name is Victor Sava," Mara said quietly. "And if the man who called you is connected to him, then the nurse who died yesterday was only the beginning." Elias felt the room tilt slightly around him. Outside the office window, ambulance sirens echoed faintly through the city. Somewhere in the distance, a storm was beginning to form over the harbor, and in that moment Elias realized that the choice he had made 5 years earlier had never truly ended. It had only been waiting. Mara did not let the silence settle. "Tell me everything," she said, and there was no edge of official procedure left in her voice now. Only urgency. Elias looked at the photograph of Victor Sava and felt an old nausea stirring in him. The kind that came not from fear alone, but from the shame of seeing one's worst decision dragged back into daylight. "I didn't know his name then," he said. "The man on the table never told me who he was working for. He had a gunshot wound. He was losing blood fast. There was a woman with him, maybe 20, maybe younger. She kept saying the police were behind them. I thought she was terrified. I thought they were both just desperate." Mara said nothing, giving him the room to indict himself. "I should have called the police the second I saw the bullet pattern," Elias continued. "It was close range, not some accident, not random street violence, but he looked like he was going to die, and I made the decision I've made 1,000 times with patience. I treated the body in front of me. I told myself that was the right thing. Maybe I even wanted to believe I was the kind of man who could stay clean in a dirty situation." Mara's face hardened. And the woman? Elias closed his eyes for a moment. She cried when he came out of surgery. Not grateful. Relieved. Like she'd just preserved something dangerous because she couldn't imagine surviving without it. Mara leaned on the desk. What did she look like? Elias frowned, forcing the image back. Wet hair stuck to her face. A split lip. A bruise blooming under one eye. But she had not looked broken. She had looked trapped and furious at the same time. Dark hair. Thin. Scar near the chin. She called him Luca. Mara's expression shifted. Luca Sava? Elias stared. Sava? Victor's younger brother. Mara said. Officially dead 4 years ago in a boating accident off the northern coast. Unofficially, half the organized crime unit believed the body was misidentified, and Victor buried the investigation with help from inside the Port Authority. Elias felt the floor of the room recede under him. Then he's alive. Mara exhaled. Or he was. The man in the hallway could be Luca, but the age on your memory is close. It could also be someone who knows the story. Victor keeps loyalty like a disease. It passes from one host to another. Elias looked at her sharply. Why are you telling me this? She met his gaze without blinking. Because if you're in the middle of this, I need you frightened enough to stop lying by omission. Before Elias could answer, there was a knock at the office door, and a woman stepped in wearing a tailored charcoal coat, her blonde hair pinned back with severe precision. She held a leather folder and the kind of expression that turned every room into a courtroom. Dr. Varon, she said. I'm Helena Ward, counsel for Street Dismas Hospital. I need a word. Mara straightened. This is an active police matter. Helena glanced at her badge. And this is a liability emergency. A staff member was killed on our premises. The board has questions. Elias almost laughed at the coldness of the phrasing, but he was too tired to make the sound. Helena set the folder on the desk and opened it. The board has voted to place you on immediate administrative leave pending the investigation. Elias stared at her. You're suspending me. Temporarily removing you from surgical duty, Helena corrected. Security concerns and reputational risk make this unavoidable. Mara watched the exchange carefully. That's fast, she said. Helena's smile was small and bloodless. Hospitals tend to move quickly when donors start calling. Elias felt something tighten in him, something darker than panic. A nurse was murdered, he said. And the board's first priority is donors? Helena's face did not change. The board's first priority is preserving the institution so more people do not get hurt. Mara gave a dry, humorless laugh. That sentence should be illegal. Helena ignored her and slid a paper toward Elias. You will surrender your access badge, parking pass, and office keys by 6 o'clock. Elias did not touch the paper. Who pushed for this? He asked. Helena paused just a fraction too long. The board chair. Name. You know the name, she said. Daniel Roerich. Elias felt a small, ugly flash of recognition. Daniel Roerich was not just the board chair. He was the man who had funded half the new surgical wing and spent the other half of his time collecting influence like fine art. 3 years earlier, Elias had refused to alter a death certificate for one of Roerich's business associates after an overdose. Roerich had smiled through the confrontation, but the smile had promised memory. Mara caught the shift in Elias's expression. You know him. Elias nodded once. Helena closed the folder. Whether this is personal or not, the decision stands. She turned and left without another word. After the door shut, Mara said, That didn't feel coincidental. Elias looked out through the office window at the ambulance bay below. Nothing feels coincidental anymore. Mara checked her phone, then frowned. I have to go downstairs. Forensics found something in the nurse's locker. Elias looked at her. What? Mara slipped the phone into her coat pocket. A sealed envelope with your name on it. The envelope was waiting in an evidence bag when they reached the security office. The nurse's name had been Talia Mercer, 32 years old, divorced, 2 sons. Loved terrible coffee and old detective novels, according to one of the other nurses who had spoken through tears outside the break room. Elias had known her for 4 years. He had never once imagined that his choices could become the reason her children would grow up speaking of her in the past tense. Mara placed the bag on the table and sliced it open carefully. Inside was a plain white envelope. Elias's name had been written on the front in blue ink, neat and deliberate. He opened it with shaking fingers and pulled out a single folded note. There were only 8 words. She knew what you buried. Now find her first. Elias read the sentence twice before Mara took the paper from him. Her? Mara repeated. The woman from the clinic? Elias nodded slowly. Maybe. Mara looked up. Did Talia know anything about your past? No. But even as he said it, certainty failed him. Talia had worked late shifts often. She had covered his emergencies, managed his schedule. overheard fragments of conversations in hallways and elevators. 1,000 small, unnoticed moments passed through a hospital every day. Secrets rarely stayed as hidden as people imagined. Mara looked toward Officer Lin. Get a team to Talia Mercer's apartment. I want her computer, phone records, bank activity, everything. Lin moved instantly. Elias sank into a chair and stared at the note. What if she found out on her own? He murmured. Mara heard him. Found out what? Exactly. Elias rubbed his hands over his face. After that surgery 5 years ago, I didn't go straight home. I drove to the coast and burned the bloodied surgical drapes in a metal trash barrel behind the clinic. Then I threw away the fake intake forms. I told the director the storm had knocked out our record system. He believed me because the roof had actually leaked that night. Mara's voice became very still. You destroyed evidence. Elias looked at her with naked self-disgust. Yes. Why? The question was simple, but he could feel the years packed inside it. Because the woman begged me, he said. She kept saying that if the police found him, they'd find her. And if they found her, they'd send her back. She wouldn't tell me where back was. She was shaking so badly she could barely stand. I thought I was helping her escape something worse. Mara studied him. You're saying your crime was compassion? No, Elias said. My crime was arrogance. I decided I understood a situation I knew nothing about, and someone innocent died because of the kind of men I protected. Mara lowered her eyes to the note again. Then, let's hope the woman is still alive. By evening, the storm over the harbor had broken open, turning the city into mirrors of black water and smeared gold streetlight. Elias left the hospital carrying a cardboard box with the stripped remains of his office, a framed photograph of his younger sister, Naomi, a coffee mug from a medical conference in Zurich, a stack of patient commendations that now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. At the curb, Mara waited in an unmarked sedan with the engine running. You're not driving home alone, she said through the open window. Elias almost refused out of habit, then saw 2 men standing under the pharmacy awning across the street, pretending not to watch him. He got into the passenger seat without a word. They drove through the rain in silence until Mara finally said, Tell me about your sister. Elias glanced at the photograph in the box. Why? Because people in your position make mistakes when they're protecting someone. I need to know who you'll lie for. He gave a faint, exhausted smile. You're very direct. Occupational defect. Elias looked at the blurred lights passing by outside. Naomi's a public defender. Younger than me by 6 years. Smarter than me by 10. We don't talk much anymore. Why not? He let out a breath. Because our father drank himself into debt and humiliation, and when he died, Naomi thought I should have stayed in the city to help her deal with it. I was in residency. I told myself I was saving lives. She told me I was using medicine as a respectable excuse to abandon ugly things I couldn't fix. Mara kept her eyes on the road. Was she wrong? Elias considered the question longer than he expected. Not entirely. Mara nodded, as if filing that answer away. When they reached Elias's apartment building, 2 police cars were already outside. He felt his chest seize. Mara parked hard and both of them hurried through the rain. The front doorman met them at the entrance, pale and trembling. 3rd floor, he said. Someone got in through the fire stair. Elias took the stairs 2 at a time and nearly slipped on the wet tile outside his door. The lock had been broken. Inside, the apartment looked untouched at first glance. Books on shelves, lamps standing, kitchen spotless. Then Elias saw the dining table. Someone had arranged 4 objects in a precise row beneath the hanging light. A rusted surgical clamp, a waterproof lighter, an old clinic ID badge with Elias's photograph from 5 years earlier, and a woman's silver necklace with a small cracked blue stone. The breath left his body. That's hers, he whispered. Mara stepped beside him. The woman from the clinic? Elias nodded. He knew it with awful certainty. He remembered the necklace because the blue stone had flashed under the operating room light, while she leaned over Luca's unconscious body, pressing her knuckles to her mouth to stop herself from crying out. Mara put on gloves and looked around the apartment. No signs of theft, she said. This wasn't a search. It was a message. Elias stared at the necklace. He has her. Or had her. No. Elias shook his head, as if the force of denial might keep the alternative away. No, this was done carefully. He wants me moving. He wants me desperate. Mara looked at him. Then don't give him what he wants. Elias laughed once, bitterly. A woman might be alive somewhere because I covered for the man who hurt her, and your advice is emotional moderation? Mara's jaw tightened. My advice is survival. Desperate people get used. Before Elias could answer, his phone rang again from inside the cardboard box. Unknown number. He stared at it. Mara nodded once. Speaker. Elias answered and set the phone on the table between them. The same calm voice filled the room. "The necklace is real," the caller said. "I thought authenticity mattered to a man like you," Mara mouthed. "Keep him talking." Elias swallowed. "Where is she?" A soft chuckle. "So you do remember her. Where is she?" Elias repeated. Louder this time. "Still asking the wrong question," the voice said. "You should be asking whether she wants to be found." Mara leaned closer, her face unreadable. Elias forced himself to keep control. "If you hurt her?" "If?" the caller interrupted. "Doctor, you really are a hopeful man. It's almost offensive." Elias's hand tightened around the back of a chair. "What do you want from me?" There was a brief sound in the background, metallic, like a chain dragging across concrete. Then the man said, "I want a trade. Information for information. You tell me where Victor keeps his offshore ledgers, and I tell you where the woman is." Mara's eyes sharpened. Elias stared at the phone. "I don't know anything about Victor's ledgers." "That's disappointing," the caller said. "Because Victor believes you do." The line went silent for 3 full seconds. Then a second voice spoke, weak and ragged, unmistakably female. "Don't tell him anything." Elias felt the room stop. The woman coughed harshly. "If he says my name," she whispered, "hang up." A crack sounded, sharp and sickening, as if someone had struck flesh. Elias stepped forward involuntarily. "No." The first voice returned, composed as ever. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, Pier 9 ferry terminal. Come alone, or she disappears again. Bring your memory this time." The call ended. Rain hammered the windows. Mara was already dialing Trace, but they both knew it was useless. Burner phones. Routed signal. Careful men. Elias stared at the dark screen and heard the woman's voice echoing in his skull. Not her fear. Not even the pain. The command inside it. Don't tell him anything. As if the information mattered more than her life. Mara lowered her phone. "We can put a surveillance grid around Pier 9, she said. "Drones? Plainclothes? Snipers if I can get authorization." Elias barely heard her. He was remembering the woman at the clinic again. Not crying over Luca now, but turning toward Elias just before dawn while the generator hummed in the storm-dark room. "If anyone asks," she had said, "you never saw me." He had answered with the stupid certainty of a man who thought silence could still be a form of kindness. "No one will ask." She had looked at him then, with something like pity. "Men always ask," she said. Mara touched his shoulder lightly, dragging him back. "Elias." He looked at her. "What if Victor really thinks I know something?" he asked. "Then why?" Mara considered. "Maybe because someone told him you were more involved than you were. Maybe because the woman gave them your name for a reason. Maybe because 5 years ago you saw or heard something you didn't understand. And it matters now." Elias looked at the objects on the table. The clamp, the lighter, the badge, the necklace. Memory did not return like a door opening. It came as fragments. The smell of diesel near the clinic. The woman washing blood off her hands in a metal sink. Luca waking from anesthesia and whispering, not to Elias but to her, "Tell Victor the manifests are buried with the priest." Elias went still. Mara saw it happen. "What?" He stared past her. "Manifests," he said slowly. "He said manifests are buried with the priest." Mara frowned. "What priest?" "I don't know." Elias pressed a hand to his forehead. "I barely understood him at the time. He was delirious. I thought he was rambling." Mara's focus sharpened with almost frightening intensity. "Cargo manifests? Maybe. Buried where? He didn't say. Or if he did, I don't remember." Mara started pacing the apartment, mind racing visibly now. If Victor built shipping routes through the Port Authority, paper manifests could tie him to every disappearance, every weapons transfer, every bribe. If a priest hid them, maybe it was confession money, maybe sanctuary, maybe blackmail. Elias felt suddenly colder than the rain outside could explain. And if the woman heard Luca say it too, then she's not just a witness, she's leverage. Mara stopped pacing. "Do you know any priest from that town?" Elias thought. The clinic had been attached to a parish outreach center. There had been an old priest who brought soup to migrant workers and asked too few questions because he believed feeding people mattered more than judging them. Father Tom Arlen. Stooped shoulders, ink stains on his fingers, kind eyes that had looked at everyone as if forgiveness were the default state of the world. Elias felt sick. "Father Tom," he said. He ran the parish center next to the clinic. Mara took out her phone. "Alive?" Elias hesitated. "I don't know. Then we find out." She made 3 calls in quick succession, her voice clipped and efficient, while Elias stood in the wreckage of his own consequences. At some point, one of the uniformed officers brought coffee. Neither of them drank it. After 20 minutes, Mara ended the last call and looked at Elias with a face that told him the answer before she spoke. Father Tom Arlen died 3 years ago, she said. Official cause was heart failure, buried in Street Bridget's cemetery outside the coastal town. Elias lowered himself into a chair because his knees no longer felt reliable. Buried with the priest, he murmured. Mara nodded. We go tonight. He looked up at her. Tonight? By morning, every interested party could know about Pier 9. If the manifests exist, and they're in that grave or near it, we cannot let Victor's people get there first. Elias glanced toward the window, where the rain kept slashing the glass like something impatient to come in. And the woman? Mara's eyes hardened. If she's alive, those manifests may be the only reason she still is. They left the apartment under police guard, and drove south along the coast road in a car that smelled faintly of wet fabric and old cigarettes. Mara drove with both hands tight on the wheel, while Elias sat beside her, listening to the tires hiss over the rain-black pavement. The city thinned into warehouses, then truck depots, then stretches of dark water and bent pines. Around midnight, Mara finally said, "There's something I haven't told you." Elias turned to her, too tired to brace for more. "What?" She kept her eyes ahead. Daniel Rorick, the hospital board chair. He used to sit on a civic trade advisory council with Victor Sava. Nothing criminal on paper. Fundraisers, port redevelopment hearings, photographs in tuxedos. But 2 years ago, an internal affairs review flagged Rorick's name in connection with sealed evidence from a customs raid that vanished before prosecution. Elias stared at her. "And you just happened to leave that part out. I needed to know whether you were part of the rot, or one of the people standing on top of it pretending the smell wasn't there." He let the words settle. "And which am I?" Mara answered after a long silence. "You're the kind of man who tells himself one compromise can still be moral if it saves someone. Men like that are dangerous, but they're also sometimes useful, because guilt can make them braver than innocence ever will." Elias looked back out at the road. He should have resented her. Instead, he heard the truth in it, and hated that truth more than her judgment. Near 1 in the morning, they reached the coastal town. The clinic where Elias had once worked stood dark and half abandoned, its windows boarded, its sign hanging crooked over the flooded gravel lot. The parish church beside it still held a weak yellow light near the rear entrance. They parked under cypress trees and got out into the wind. The cemetery rose behind the church on a low hill overlooking the sea. Rows of gravestones leaned under the storm, gray and watchful. Mara opened the trunk and handed Elias a shovel. "Tell me you've done crazier things," she said. Elias looked at the shovel, then at the cemetery. "Only in surgery." They climbed the hill in silence, shoes sinking in wet earth, breath turning white in the cold air. Father Tom Arlen's grave was near the far stone wall, marked by a plain granite slab and a rusting iron cross. Mara shone her flashlight over the fresh mud around the site and stopped. "We're late," she said. The grave had already been disturbed. The mud around the stone was churned by recent footprints, some half filled with rainwater, others still sharply cut into the earth, where the wind had not yet reached them, and the sight hit Elias with a strange mix of dread and relief. Because if someone had already come for whatever Father Tom had been buried with, then the secret was real. And if the secret was real, then the woman on the phone was not clinging to nonsense or delirium, but to something worth bleeding for. Mara crouched beside the grave and aimed the flashlight low. "2 sets of prints," she said. "Maybe 3. 1 heavy, 1 lighter. Whoever came here knew exactly where to dig." Elias looked past her at the church windows, glowing faintly through the rain. Or someone told them. Mara straightened, eyes moving across the cemetery wall. The tree line. The narrow road below. "Stay here." She walked toward the church at a quick, controlled pace, one hand near the holster under her coat. Elias remained by the grave, the shovel hanging uselessly from his hand, staring at the iron cross bent above Father Tom's name. He remembered the priest's voice from years ago, soft and worn, speaking over a chipped mug of tea in the parish kitchen after Elias had finished a double shift. "There is a difference," Father Tom had said, "between mercy and fear dressed as mercy. People confuse them because both can look like silence." Elias had smiled politely then, too tired to think, too certain that the moral world could still be sorted into clean categories by intention. Now the memory felt like a verdict delivered years before the crime had fully unfolded. Wind hissed through the cemetery grass. Somewhere below, a car door slammed. Elias turned sharply, but saw only darkness beyond the stone wall. His pulse quickened. Mara returned 5 minutes later with an elderly man wrapped in a brown wool coat and carrying a lantern instead of a flashlight, as if the town still belonged more to an older century than to the one Elias had spent his adult life navigating. The man's face was narrow and deeply lined. His eyes, however, were alert in a way that made Elias think of schoolmasters and judges. "This is Brother Ansel," Mara said. "He keeps the church records and apparently sleeps lighter than the dead." Brother Ansel lifted the lantern toward the grave and clicked his tongue softly. "I told Father Luca the lock on the cemetery gate needed replacing," he murmured. "He said God watches over the resting. I said God delegates poorly." Mara crouched again near the disturbed soil. "Did you hear anyone tonight?" she asked. "A van on the lower road around 11, Ansel said. "No headlights. I looked through the vestry window, saw 2 men and a woman." Elias snapped his head toward him. "A woman?" Ansel nodded once. "She was walking on her own, but not well. One of the men held her arm." Mara and Elias exchanged a look. "Could you see her face?" Mara asked. Only when the lantern in the cemetery shelter caught it for a second. Ansel turned to Elias, studying him. She looked at the church like she knew it. Not with fear, with anger. Elias felt a chill move through him that had nothing to do with the weather. "Did they take anything?" Mara asked. Brother Ansel gestured toward the grave. "They dug. They found a tin box beneath the coffin edge, and then the woman spat in one of the men's face. He hit her. Hard. They drove off north." Elias's grip tightened on the shovel handle until his knuckles ached. Mara saw it and said quietly, "Stay useful." Brother Ansel lifted the lantern higher and peered at Elias more closely. Recognition dawned with painful slowness. "You are the doctor," he said. "The one from the clinic." Elias swallowed. "Yes." Ansel's expression did not harden, but disappointment passed through it like a shadow over water. "Then the woman was waiting for you back then," he said. "I wondered if you ever understood that." Elias stared at him. "What do you mean?" The old man looked at the disturbed grave, then toward the sea beyond the cemetery hill, black and restless under the storm. "She came to Father Tom 2 nights before the shooting at the docks," he said. "She asked whether a man can be forgiven for something he has not yet done, but knows he will do. Tom told her that guilt begins before action if the soul has already consented. She cried after that, though quietly. She said there was one man she thought might still choose decency if pushed hard enough." Elias felt the night narrow around him. "Me?" Brother Ansel gave a sad little shrug. "I believe so." Mara's voice turned careful. "Did she have a name?" "She gave 3, Ansel replied. "When someone gives 3 names, it usually means none are safe." Elias could barely hear the wind anymore. "Did Father Tom ever say what was in the box?" Brother Ansel shook his head. "No, but he once told me that some records should not remain in the hands of men who use paper to wash blood off money. I assumed he meant church finances. In hindsight, I was naive." Mara drew a slow breath. "Did the van leave anything behind?" Ansel gestured toward a patch of mud near the grave. The smaller man dropped this while they were lifting the box. Mara shone her flashlight there. Half buried in the mud lay a brass key attached to a cheap red plastic tag. Elias bent and picked it up carefully. The tag had a faded number stamped into it, 214. On the back, almost worn away, were the words Harbor View Motor Lodge. Mara's eyes sharpened. "How far?" Brother Ansel answered immediately. 20 minutes north on the old coast road, mostly used by truckers and men who don't want to be remembered. Mara thanked him, but Brother Ansel held up a hand before they could leave. He looked directly at Elias. "When mercy arrives late," he said, "it often looks like punishment first." Elias did not know how to answer. He nodded once, then followed Mara down the hill. The drive north was a blur of rain, darkness, and the engine's strained hum as Mara pushed the car faster than the roads deserved. Elias turned the brass key over in his fingers, feeling the edges bite into his palm. "If she was with them at the grave," he said, "then why leave the key?" Mara kept her focus on the road. "Maybe she dropped it on purpose. Maybe one of them did. Maybe it's bait." Elias stared through the windshield. "We're still going." "Of course we are, even if it's bait." Mara glanced at him briefly. "Especially if it's bait. Bait means control. Control means they want us somewhere. If we know that, we at least know one true thing." Elias almost asked how she could sound so steady, but then he noticed the muscle jumping in her jaw and the white tension in her fingers on the wheel. Steady was not the same as calm. The Harbor View Motor Lodge appeared out of the storm like a place built from neglect itself. A long row of rooms facing a parking lot striped with standing water and lit by 2 flickering sodium lamps. A neon sign buzzed weakly over the office, losing the fight to darkness 1 letter at a time. No other cars were visible except an oil-stained pickup near the far end. Mara parked beside the office with the headlights off. "You stay behind me," she said. Elias almost objected, then heard how absurd that would be. They moved through the rain to the office door. A bell jangled overhead when Mara pushed inside. The lobby smelled of mildew, bleach, and old cigarettes. Behind the counter, a television played a game show to an empty room. A teenage clerk wearing headphones looked up in mild alarm. Mara showed her badge. Room 214. The clerk blinked. Second floor. End unit, he said. Paid cash. Guy said his wife was sick. How many people? Mara asked. 2 men, 1 woman. She looked. He faltered, glancing toward Elias as if unsure how much ugliness strangers wanted named. She looked bad, he finished. When did they check in? 40 minutes ago. Mara leaned forward. Did they leave? No. He swallowed. I think they're still there. Mara nodded toward the office phone. Call no one. Say nothing. If you hear gunshots, get on the floor. The boy nodded too fast. The second-floor walkway creaked under their steps. Rain blew sideways through the open corridor, turning the metal railings slick and shining. Room 214 stood at the far end. Door closed, curtains drawn. Mara motioned Elias back against the wall, then listened at the door. Nothing. No television. No voices. No movement. She inserted the brass key slowly and tested the knob. Unlocked. Her expression hardened, confirming what both of them now knew. It was bait. She pushed the door open with her shoulder and entered low, weapon drawn. Elias followed a second later, despite her signal to stay back. The room was empty. One bed unmade. Bathroom light on. Window open to the storm. On the small table between the beds stood a portable cassette recorder beside a folded motel notepad page. Mara crossed the room first and scanned the bathroom. Empty. Elias looked at the paper. It said only, "Play it." Mara kept her gun raised with one hand and hit the recorder with the other. Static crackled for a second. Then a woman's voice began speaking, measured but strained, as if every word cost something. If you're hearing this, Elias, then you are finally where I needed you to be 5 years ago. He froze. The voice was older than he remembered, roughened by exhaustion and something harsher, but it was hers. There could be no doubt. My name is Lena Arendt, the recording continued. At least that is the name I have kept the longest. Luca was never meant to survive the docks that night. Victor wanted him dead after he took copies of shipping manifests from the port accounts. Luca was stupid enough to think blood meant protection. It never does with men like Victor. I worked in Victor's accounting office under another name. I copied the manifests before Luca stole them because I knew what they proved. Girls moved through cold storage containers listed as seafood. Weapons hidden inside church relief shipments. Judges paid through shell charities. When Luca ran, he dragged me with him because he thought I loved him. Maybe I did once. By the time you saw us, love had already become the least important part. Elias felt as though he were listening through water. Mara raised a hand, silently telling him to stay present. Lena went on, "You saved Luca, and that changed everything. He told me in the clinic that he had hidden the originals with Father Tom, because priests are less likely to be searched by men who still fear God in public. He also told me he had hidden one more copy where Victor would never look, because Victor believes money should live near power, and Luca always liked childish ironies." There was a coughing fit on the tape, harsh and wet. Then her voice returned, softer. "If Victor's people are forcing you to help them, understand this. The manifests matter, but not as much as the ledger list attached to them. Every payment, every official, every account, that is what keeps him alive." Luca planned to sell the list to a federal intermediary through a lawyer in the city. He never got the chance. After the clinic, Victor found us within 2 days. Luca died for real that week. I made sure of it. Elias looked at Mara, who looked back at him with the shock stripped bare across her face. The tape clicked faintly as Lena continued. "Yes, I killed him. Not because I hated him, though I did by then, because as long as he lived, he would always choose himself over every person he claimed to protect. I learned that from Victor. Men raised in fear become loyal to it. I could not outrun both brothers, so I ended one." Elias heard his own breath, too loud in the room. Some part of him had spent 5 years imagining her as a victim frozen in helplessness. The voice on the tape was not helpless. It was wounded, yes, but forged by choices made in fire. "I took the copies Father Tom hid, and I split them," Lena said. "One portion stayed near the coast. The more dangerous portion went inland with someone I trusted less than I should have. If Victor asks you about the offshore ledgers, he means the account numbers in the second portion. He thinks you know because Luca woke during anesthesia and spoke your name while I was still trying to keep him quiet. I told Victor later that the doctor had heard enough to be useful. I did that because I needed one door left open in case everything else closed. If you hate me for that, good. Hate is at least honest." Mara stepped closer to the recorder, intent now like a blade. "Where is the second portion?" she whispered, though of course the tape moved at its own pace. Lena answered a moment later as if hearing her. "If I am dead by the time you find this, go to Daniel Roerick. Mara swore under her breath. Elias stared. Lena continued. He launders philanthropy through port expansion charities and keeps private documents away from his office because he is vain enough to think his home should contain what his soul cannot. There is a room beneath his wine cellar, with a steel cabinet hidden behind the third rack on the east wall. The key is not physical, it is a date. The date his daughter died. He still uses grief as a password because men like him confuse pain with sanctity. Elias felt the world shift. Rorik, the board chair, the donor, the man who had pushed him off hospital duty within hours. The tape hissed softly before Lena spoke again, and now her voice seemed closer to breaking. I don't know how much time I have. The man holding me is not Victor. He serves himself before he serves anyone, which may be my only remaining advantage. If he makes you choose between my life and the ledger list, choose the list. Listen to me. If you choose me, he will kill me later and keep the list. If you choose the list, people who have hidden for years may finally have a chance to drag Victor and the rest into daylight. Do not make your old mistake again. Do not save one damaged body by protecting the machine that destroys hundreds. The recording stopped for a second, then resumed with a sudden scrape and a different sound in the background, as if the recorder had been turned back on after interruption. When Lena's voice returned, it was lower, almost intimate. There is one more truth. Elias. Talia Mercer did know something. She found an old billing discrepancy from the clinic after the hospital acquired archived records in a charity merger. She asked me about it because she recognized my face from a support group at Street, Dismas under another name. She was trying to help me disappear before Victor's people connected the records. She died because she trusted the wrong timetable, not the wrong man. If you carry her guilt, carry it accurately. The tape ended with a click. For several seconds, neither Mara nor Elias moved. Rain lashed through the open window and spattered the motel carpet. Somewhere outside, a truck passed on the highway with a long, mournful blast of air brakes that sounded almost human. Mara was the first to speak. Rorik, she said. Jesus Christ. Elias sat slowly on the edge of the nearest bed because his legs felt unreliable again. Talia knew. Talia had found the thread. Talia had tried to help Lena. His throat tightened with a grief so sharp it seemed to carve language out of him. She died because she got close to my lie, he said. Mara did not soften the truth. She died because several men built empires on the assumption that everyone else would stay afraid. Elias looked up. What do we do? Mara holstered her weapon and stared at the notepad page beside the recorder. We decide whether we trust a woman who admits to murder, a corrupt philanthropist with political insulation, and a man on the phone who is clearly running his own game against Victor. She paused. Then we do the least survivable thing. Elias understood before she said it. Break into Rorik's house. Obtain evidence from Rorik's house, she corrected. The legality can collapse later. He almost smiled, but the tape still echoed in him, especially the line that cut deepest. Do not make your old mistake again. Mara picked up the recorder and slid it into an evidence bag from her coat pocket. There's a bigger problem, she said. If Lena wanted us to hear that, then whoever let the recorder stay here wanted it too. We are being steered. Elias rose. Toward Rorik. Yes. By whom? Mara's expression went flat. Maybe the man on the phone. Maybe someone above him. Maybe Lena herself, assuming she has more control than her voice suggests. Elias thought of the calm caller, of the background chain sound, of the deliberate cruelty. He said he wanted the ledgers. Maybe he does, Mara said. But power struggles inside criminal systems don't make anyone innocent. Sometimes the most useful person in a war is the one both sides think they can manipulate. They left the room as carefully as they had entered, but halfway down the second-floor walkway, Elias stopped. In the parking lot below, headlights slid soundlessly off the wet asphalt as a black sedan rolled in and parked beneath the flickering sign. Two men got out. One of them held an umbrella. The other wore no coat despite the rain. Even from that distance, Elias recognized the severe blonde hair and rigid posture of Helena Ward, hospital counsel, stepping out of the passenger side like she belonged everywhere she arrived. Mara saw them at the same moment. Inside, she hissed, pulling Elias back into the shadow near the stairwell landing. They crouched behind the vending machines as Helena and the two men moved toward room 214. Your hospital lawyer has adventurous hobbies, Mara muttered. Elias watched Helena confer briefly with the men, then point toward the room. She's involved with Rorik, he said, or terrified of him. Mara shook her head. Fear leaves hesitation. She moved like someone protecting an investment. The taller of the men reached room 214, found the door unlocked, and disappeared inside. Seconds later he re-emerged and spoke to Helena. Her face changed only slightly, but it was enough. Anger, not surprise. She turned and scanned the walkway. Elias and Mara sank lower into the shadows. If she knows we were here, Elias whispered, then Rorik knows we heard the tape. Mara's mind was already moving. Then we stop going where they expect. She pulled out her phone and typed rapidly. What are you doing? Elias asked, sending Lynn an anonymous request to put visible surveillance around Rorik's house in 30 minutes. Elias frowned. Visible? Yes. If Rorik panics, he may try to move the cabinet contents. Panic creates motion, and motion is easier to track than locked rooms. Elias looked down at Helena below, watching her pace in the rain while her men checked the parking lot. And if he destroys it instead? Mara met his eyes. Then we go in before he gets the chance. They slipped down the rear stairwell and cut through the back service alley behind the motel, rain soaking them within seconds. Mara's car was too exposed in the front lot, so they kept running until they reached the church supply truck parked beside the neighboring diner, its keys still idiotically hanging in the ignition. Mara looked at Elias. He looked back. Neither spoke. A second later they were in the truck, tires throwing muddy water as they lurched onto the old coast road. Only once the motel lights had vanished behind them did Mara let out the breath she had been holding. I'm adding theft to the night, she said. I hope your medical ethics can absorb that. Elias stared at the wet darkness ahead. My ethics seem to have expanded under stress. Mara actually laughed then, once, unexpectedly, and the sound broke something taut between them. Not trust exactly, but the beginning of a harsher, more practical alliance built on shared exposure. 20 minutes later, her phone buzzed. She checked the message and handed it to Elias. It was from Lynn. Visible units deployed near Rorik residence. Neighbor complaint cover story. Also, Naomi Varon has been trying to reach you for 2 hours. Elias felt a small stab of alarm. Naomi? Mara glanced at him. You didn't tell me she was in the city tonight. I didn't know. His phone, still half dead from repeated calls, showed 7 missed messages from his sister and 1 voicemail. He played the voicemail on speaker. Naomi's voice came through thin with static and barely controlled fury. Elias, answer your phone. 2 men came by Chambers tonight asking whether I still keep our father's lockbox documents. I told them to get out. One of them mentioned your hospital. If this is about you, and I swear to God it had better not be, call me now. Elias closed his eyes. Mara swore softly. Your father's lockbox documents? Elias nodded slowly. After he died, Naomi found papers in a bank box he'd never told us about. Debts, letters, old shipping invoices from his years at the port accounting office before the drinking got bad. Mara's head turned sharply. Port accounting office? It was decades ago. He worked clerical, night shifts. Did Rorik or Victor ever overlap with him? Elias shook his head, then stopped as another memory surfaced. Not of his father sober. That memory was rare. Of his father drunk in a kitchen chair, whispering hoarsely one night when Elias was 17 and trying to get him to bed. Never trust the names that repeat on paper, his father had muttered. Repeated names mean the cargo exists twice, and people only duplicate lies when bodies are involved. Elias had dismissed it as alcoholic nonsense. Now the words returned with unbearable clarity. Mara saw the change in his face. What? He swallowed. My father saw something. The truck roared south toward the city while the storm deepened over the coast, and for the first time, Elias understood that the secret he had stumbled into 5 years ago might not have begun with him at all. It might have started much earlier, in another ledger, in another compromised man sitting drunk at a kitchen table while his children learned to confuse silence with survival. And as that realization settled, his fear changed shape. It was no longer only about Lena, or Talia, or the caller at Pier 9. It was about family now, inheritance now, the terrifying possibility that guilt could move through generations the way violence moved through organizations, adapting its language but keeping its appetite. Mara drove faster. Ahead, somewhere beyond the rain and sodium light and the widening web of consequences, Daniel Rorik was either preparing to erase his secrets or discovering that too many people had finally learned where to look. By the time they reached the city limits, the storm had thinned into a cold mist that made every traffic signal look haloed and unreal. And Elias could feel exhaustion trying to drag him under, not the clean fatigue of medicine after a 30-hour shift, but a heavier kind, moral and cellular at once, as if every buried choice were waking inside him and demanding blood payment with interest. Mara drove one-handed now, her other hand moving between phone, radio, and the folded note she had taken from the motel room, though there had been nothing else on it beyond the instruction to play the tape. Call your sister, she said. Now. Elias nodded and dialed Naomi with a thumb that felt strangely numb. She answered on the second ring, not with hello but with, where are you? Her voice was sharpened by fear and anger in equal measure. which for Naomi often meant fear had been forced to dress itself as anger to remain useful. "I'm with a detective," Elias said. "You're safe?" "That depends what your definition of safe is tonight." Naomi. He could hear himself slipping into the older brother tone she had hated since childhood, the one that assumed authority whenever he felt helpless. "Are you home?" "No," she snapped. "After the two men came by, I left. I'm at Chambers. There are security guards downstairs." Mara held out a hand and Elias put the phone on speaker. "Naomi," Mara said. "Detective Mara Kessler. Don't go home. Don't leave the building alone. And don't give anyone anything from your father's lockbox until we see you." Naomi's silence on the line was brief, but loaded. "My father's lockbox has been closed for 12 years, she said. "Whatever you think is in it, I already went through it after the funeral." Elias glanced at Mara. "You told me it was debts and paperwork." "Because that's what I wanted it to be," Naomi replied. "Most of it was. Then there were a few invoices from the port, some duplicate ledgers with numbers I didn't understand, and a letter addressed to a priest. I burned the letter." Elias felt a jolt so sharp it seemed to pull him fully awake. "You what?" "Don't start sounding righteous now," Naomi said, her voice dropping. He'd been dead for 3 days. Men in suits had already come twice asking whether he'd left business documents behind. "We were being evicted. I was 24. You were busy becoming everyone's miracle surgeon. I burned anything that looked like it could keep our father dangerous after death." Mara's eyes stayed on the road, but Elias saw the calculation flickering behind them. "Did you keep the ledgers?" Mara asked. Naomi answered after a pause. "One of them. Not because I'm brave. Because I wanted proof that he had once been more than a drunk who ruined every room he entered. The numbers were neat, repeated, wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I hid it." Elias closed his eyes briefly. "Where?" "Not over the phone." Mara said. "Good. Stay exactly where you are. We're coming." Naomi let out a brittle laugh with no humor in it. "That's the first time in years you've sounded like family under pressure, Elias." Then the line went dead. For several seconds, the truck held only road noise and breath. Mara finally said, "You and your sister fight like people who learned early, that love costs leverage." Elias stared ahead. "Our father taught us that." Yes, the courthouse where Naomi kept Chambers after hours rose out of the mist like an illuminated cliff, all glass, steel, and pale stone steps slick with rain. Uniformed security met them in the lobby and recognized Mara's badge before either of them had to waste time lying. On the 21st floor, Naomi was waiting in a conference room with her coat still on, dark curls pinned up badly from what looked like a long day turned feral, a legal pad in front of her, and a letter opener in hand, like she had decided that if men wanted to frighten her tonight, they would at least do it while being stabbed with office supplies. She stood when Elias entered, and for one aching second he saw the 19-year-old version of her who had called him from the hospital when their father died, trying so hard to sound practical that grief had come out as contempt. Then the moment passed and she looked at him with adult precision. "You look terrible," she said. "You look armed," Elias answered. Naomi glanced at the letter opener. Occupational adaptation. Mara closed the conference room blinds and moved to the table. "We need the ledger." Naomi did not sit. "I need a truthful summary first. No protective editing. No medical tone. No brotherly omissions." Elias looked at her and understood, with a painful clarity he should have reached years earlier, that Naomi had built her entire adult life as a defense against men telling partial truths in soothing voices. He told her everything he could in 10 minutes. The clinic, Luca, Lena, Talia, the tape, Rorik. By the time he finished, Naomi's face had gone very still, which in her meant the opposite of calm. "So let me understand this," she said. "Our father may have stumbled into a port laundering scheme years ago, saved a ledger, drowned himself in shame and alcohol, and now those same people are circling back through you, because every terrible male decision in this city eventually discovers a blood relative to burden." Elias flinched, not because she was unfair, but because she was efficient. "That's one version," Mara said. Naomi turned to her. "And your version?" Mara answered without hesitation. "My version is that your brother made a catastrophic moral compromise 5 years ago. But the machine underneath that compromise is bigger than him, older than him, and currently unstable enough that multiple powerful people are turning on one another. That gives us a short window to force evidence into daylight." Naomi considered her for a long moment, then nodded once, as if a standard had been met. She reached into her bag and withdrew a slim metal key. "There's a storage unit under my Chambers archive lease, registered under a dead legal aid fund the city forgot to dissolve properly. Box 48B. The ledger is in a fireproof document tube behind 3 years of juvenile appeal transcripts." Mara almost smiled. I like you. Naomi's smile was thinner. You like usefulness. Tonight, that counts. Elias held out his hand for the key, but Naomi did not give it to him. I'm coming, she said. No, Elias replied immediately. Yes, she said with equal speed. You don't get to vanish into danger and return years later asking for inherited evidence like this family is some emergency equipment locker. Naomi, this is not safe, she cut in. Of course it isn't. Neither was being 24 with funeral debt and creditors at the door. Neither was watching our father drink because he knew something he could not survive knowing. Neither was hearing tonight from two men who knew my workplace. Her eyes held his with merciless steadiness. I'm done being left in the clean half of the story. The words landed exactly where she intended. Mara looked between them and made the decision Elias had been trying to avoid. She comes, Mara said. But she does what I say when things turn. Naomi handed over the key only after that. The archive storage facility sat 7 blocks away in a basement under a defunct legal records building with a broken loading dock and fluorescent lights that hummed like insects in the corridor. The kind of place cities forgot but corruption loved, because paper could sleep there for years while everyone above ground insisted progress had moved on. Mara checked the entrance first, then motioned them inside. Box 48B stood behind a chain-link partition. Naomi unlocked it and pushed aside stacked cartons labeled with case numbers. Her movements grew slower as she reached the back, not from uncertainty, but from memory. Elias watched her pull out the old document tube and realized how much of her life had been spent carrying weight he had named resilience, because it was more flattering than neglect. She opened the tube on a steel table. Inside lay a narrow ledger book, cloth-bound, its corners worn. The pages were filled with cargo entries, dates, invoice codes, and columns of handwritten annotations in a script that Elias recognized instantly and hated himself for recognizing. Their father's hand. He kept notes, Naomi said quietly. At first I thought he was correcting arithmetic. Then I realized he was tracking duplicate entries. Same shipment listed twice. Sent through different shelf fronts. Missing weight. Missing container numbers. Mara flipped carefully through the pages. These notations are gold if we can tie them to modern accounts. Naomi pointed to one repeated symbol in the margin, a small cross inside a square. He marked that next to only a few entries. Mara looked up. Meaning? Naomi shook her head. I never knew. Elias felt another fragment pushing up from somewhere old and unpleasant. Their father at the kitchen table again, sober this time but only for an hour, drawing shapes on a newspaper with a shaking pen. Cross in the box means blessed cargo, he had muttered. Elias had been 14 and trying to do homework. Nothing gets searched if the right men say God sent it. Mara turned pages until she reached a series of entries from 9 years earlier. There, listed beside a charity import consortium, was a name they all recognized now. D. Rorick Foundation Logistics. Under it were ports, dates, and outbound transfers. Next to 3 of the lines, the cross-in-box symbol appeared. Naomi read over Mara's shoulder. The charities. Mara nodded grimly. Relief shipments. The exact route Lena mentioned. Then Elias saw something else. On one page, folded into the spine so tightly it almost escaped notice, was a half sheet of onion skin paper, covered in numbers and one sentence in his father's handwriting. If Daniel learns about the second book, tell Tom only. Mara unfolded it carefully. The numbers looked like account suffixes or safety deposit references, but it was the sentence that held them. Second book, Naomi murmured. So Father Tom wasn't just given Luca's manifests years later. He may already have been part of hiding material from before. Elias felt the net drawing tighter across decades. Which means Luca didn't invent the hiding place, he said. He inherited it. Or stumbled into it through your father, Naomi said. Mara was already thinking ahead. And if Rorick knew your father had seen something, that explains the men asking Naomi about the lockbox tonight. They're patching leaks in old walls because new ones have opened. Her phone buzzed. She checked it and swore. Lynn says the surveillance around Rorick's house triggered movement. Service van out the back gate 5 minutes ago. No plates. 1 unit followed. Lost visual under the river overpass. Naomi crossed her arms. So while we've been digging through dead men's paperwork, Rorick has been emptying the cellar. Mara looked at the ledger, then at the note from Elias's father. Not necessarily all of it. Men like Rorick don't trust transit under panic. He'll move what he thinks is most incriminating first, and keep a fallback stash. Elias looked from the ledger to his sister. You should stay here now. Naomi gave him a look that translated several years of irritation into a single expression. Try again with different wording. Before he could, every light in the basement went out. The dark arrived with a hard electrical click and swallowed the room in one instant. Naomi inhaled sharply. Mara's voice came low and immediate. Don't move. Somewhere in the corridor outside, metal scraped against concrete. Elias's doctor mind, traitorous in its precision, began counting heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, then emergency lighting flickered on, dim red and intermittent, turning the chain-link walls into prison geometry. Mara had her gun out. Naomi still held the letter opener, absurd and brave. Another sound came from outside. Slow footsteps, not rushing, deliberate. Elias felt his pulse pounding in his throat. A man's voice drifted through the corridor, smooth and conversational. I was beginning to think you'd all become boring. Elias knew the voice instantly. The caller. Mara moved to one side of the storage door, signaling silence. The footsteps stopped just beyond the threshold. Doctor, the man said, almost warmly. I know you're in there. You leave a very reliable pattern of disruption. Naomi mouthed. Who is that? And Elias shook his head once, as if the answer itself might become dangerous when spoken. The voice went on. Detective Kessler as well. I hoped for you. Professional witnesses are useful when history gets revised. Mara called back without exposing herself. You've made a habit of killing intermediaries. I'm not feeling cooperative. The man laughed softly. That's fair, though for the record, I didn't kill the nurse. That was a message from someone far less imaginative. Elias stiffened. Victor, he said. No, the man replied from the other side of the door. Helena Ward, actually. Victor prefers larger gestures. Helena prefers precise collateral. It's how she's risen so far, while still being underestimated by men who mistake poise for obedience. Naomi looked at Elias, shocked, but Mara's face only grew darker, as if this confirmed a suspicion rather than creating one. What do you want? Mara asked. Efficiency, the man said. Rorik has already moved part of the cellar archive. Victor is heading to Pier 9 because he thinks you may still honor our appointment. Helena is traveling to intercept the service van before it reaches the warehouse district. And Lena is still alive, though less comfortably than before. The city is becoming crowded with unfinished loyalties. I am offering a simplification. Mara's voice became flatter. You're offering a deal. A route, he corrected. The service van contains decoy files and one authentic account drive. Helena believes it carries the true ledger list. She is wrong, but wrong in a useful way. Intercept her, and you buy time. Let her reach the van, and she burns the drive, then turns her attention back to Lena. Victor, meanwhile, will kill whichever of you arrives at Pier 9, unless he sees something he wants more than revenge. Elias stepped closer to the door before Mara could stop him. Who are you? There was a pause, long enough to feel intentional. A man your first incision kept alive, the voice said. Call me Adrian, since names are only tools tonight. Elias swallowed. Luca. No, Adrian replied. Luca died choking on his own certainty. I was the one waiting in the truck outside while Lena begged you to hurry. I was the one who learned that a doctor can become a hinge in a much larger door without meaning to. Memory came back then with sickening force. Not the operating room, the parking lot. A second figure leaning against a truck under hard rain, face hidden, smoking with steady hands while the woman paced. Elias had barely looked at him at the time. He had thought bodyguard, driver, another frightened accomplice. You were there, Elias murmured. Yes, Adrian said. And I have been tidying the consequences of that night ever since. Mara spoke before Elias could. If you want cooperation, step into view. No. Then we're done. A small object slid under the door and stopped against the concrete floor. A phone. Its screen glowed with a live video feed. Lena sat tied to a chair in what looked like a ship maintenance bay, corrugated metal walls behind her, face bruised, one eye swollen, but alive. She lifted her head toward the camera, and for a second her gaze seemed to meet Elias's through the screen, with an expression that was not pleading at all. It was furious. Adrian's voice came again. Warehouse 12, East Wharf. She remains there for perhaps 40 more minutes before Helena's backup reaches it. Or Pier 9 for Victor. Or Rorik's service van. 3 directions. 3 possible salvations. You cannot have all of them, Naomi whispered. He's forcing triage. Elias heard the doctor's word and felt physically ill. Mara stared at the glowing phone without touching it. Why? She asked. Because choices reveal character better than confessions, Adrian said. And because I want to know whether the doctor has learned anything since the storm. Silence followed. Then the footsteps retreated. Mara counted under her breath until they faded entirely. She yanked open the storage door and rushed into the corridor, gun raised, but it was empty except for the pulsing red emergency light and the smell of wet concrete. By the time she returned, Elias was still staring at the phone on the floor. Naomi stood beside him, pale, but controlled. 3 directions, Elias said. He's right. We can't do all 3. Mara grabbed the ledger, the note, and the phone in one motion. We divide. Elias looked at her. No. There is no version of this where everyone stays together and wins. Naomi is not going anywhere alone. Naomi answered for herself. I'm not the one any of them care about most. Mara turned to her sharply. That's exactly why you may be the safest courier. She looked at Elias. Listen. Warehouse 12 is about Lena. Pier 9 is about Victor. The service van is about evidence in motion. The only way to create any chance at all is to split objectives. Elias's chest felt constricted, as if every option required him to reenact his original sin in a different costume. Choose the person or choose the proof. Choose blood or system. Save one and lose many. The pressure of it made him think not of medicine, but of the corridor where Talia had died, while he pressed futile hands against a wound already beyond mending. Naomi saw something on his face then and stepped closer, her voice dropping. Elias. He looked at her. This is the part where you stop trying to be morally pure, she said. Purity is what people cling to when they want to pretend they didn't make a choice. Make one. Mara was already mapping routes aloud. Naomi, you take the ledger and the note to Lynn at Central Evidence Intake. Do not stop. Do not improvise. If anyone intercepts you, you call me, and keep driving until you hit a police barricade. Elias, you come with me to Warehouse 12. He stared. Not Pier 9? Victor expects you there. That expectation is leverage if we let him wait. Lena may still be movable, and Adrian all but told us Helena is redirecting toward the van. That means the warehouse may have the weakest perimeter right now. Elias's mind raced. And if Victor kills someone else because I don't come? Mara's answer was brutal and immediate. Then that blood belongs to Victor, not you. Stop volunteering for every crime in the room. Naomi took the ledger from Mara and shoved it into her bag. For once, she said to Elias, do the dangerous thing with someone who knows the system better than your guilt does. He wanted to argue, to hold Naomi back, to insist on Pier 9, to seize some mythical combination of choices that saved everyone and absolved him at the same time. But no such combination existed. Not tonight. Maybe never. He took a breath that hurt, and nodded. Fine. Mara killed the emergency phone light, and the basement seemed to darken in response, as if the building itself disliked decisions. They moved fast then. Naomi headed for the side exit with the ledger, and Elias's father's note zipped inside her bag. Mara and Elias took the stolen truck back to the street. The mist had thickened again, and somewhere far off a ship horn bellowed across the river like an animal calling through fog. You trust Naomi to get it done? Mara asked as they sped toward the east wharf. Elias looked through the windshield and saw, for one impossible instant, his sister at 24, burning their father's letter in a sink because there had been no other adult in the room willing to choose for the family. More than I trust myself tonight, he said. Mara nodded once, accepting that not as self-pity but as data. The east wharf loomed ahead in rusted silhouettes, cranes and container stacks rising like skeletal architecture against the mist. Warehouse 12 sat near the river bend, its corrugated roof half lit by security floods, and its loading doors closed except for one smaller personnel entrance on the north side. Mara killed the truck 2 blocks away. We go quiet from here, she said. Elias looked toward the black shape of the warehouse and tried not to think of Lena tied to a chair inside, or of Adrian somewhere beyond the visible edges of this map, arranging pressures like a composer. And Pier 9? He asked one last time. Mara checked her weapon. We survive this first. Then we see what's left to save. They stepped out into the wet night, moved along the fence line, and as they neared the warehouse, Elias heard something inside that stopped him cold. Not shouting, not machinery. Music. Faint, distorted, almost tender. A hymn playing through cheap speakers in the dark. Mara heard it too and swore under her breath. Helena, she said. She likes liturgy when she's doing ugly work. Elias felt a fresh layer of dread settle over the old. Whatever waited inside was no longer just criminal violence. It was ritual now, control now, the kind of cruelty that arranged itself carefully so it could later be remembered as necessity by the person inflicting it. Mara signaled him down, and together they slipped toward the side entrance, while the hymn drifted through the mist, warped and gentle, and utterly wrong. The metal door was not locked. That frightened Elias more than if it had been bolted from the inside. It meant either confidence or invitation, and both felt like forms of certainty he had not earned the right to survive. Mara eased it open, an inch at a time. Inside, the warehouse stretched in long, dim aisles of stacked pallets and suspended chains, lit only by work lamps placed too deliberately to be practical. Pools of yellow light carved islands in the dark. The hymn came from an old portable speaker, set atop a crate near the center of the floor. Beyond it, at the edge of the brightest circle, Lena sat tied to a metal chair exactly as the phone video had shown her, wrists bound behind the back, ankles fastened to the chair legs with industrial zip ties, head tilted forward, as if she had finally run out of rage and dropped into exhaustion. But Helena Ward was not standing over her. Helena knelt beside her, almost level with her face, one hand holding a folded white cloth to the blood at Lena's mouth, with a tenderness so convincing that for one disorienting second, Elias thought he had mistaken her entirely. Then Helena spoke, and the illusion died. "You see," she said softly, "this is why I dislike improvisation. Men hit first and ask questions later. It leaves women like us to repair the shape of events." Lena's swollen eye opened just enough to look at her. "You're not repairing anything," she whispered. "You're curating rot." Helena smiled faintly, not insulted. "Language as resistance. You always were sentimental about truth." Mara and Elias stayed in the shadows behind a column of crates, close enough to hear every word now. Helena rose with slow elegance and set the bloodied cloth on a nearby table. Two men stood farther back near the loading bay, both armed, both facing outward, one watching the side lanes, the other checking his phone every few seconds with the impatience of hired force receiving confused instructions. Helena turned away from Lena and paced once through the light, the hymn still drifting around her like something chosen for private irony. "Adrian has become tedious," she said. "He mistakes intelligence for transcendence. Men who survive one massacre start believing they authored history." Lena gave a cracked, dry laugh that turned into a wince. "And what do you believe?" Helena stopped. "That power belongs to the person willing to disappoint everyone," she said. "Victor still thinks in dynasties. Rorik thinks in legacy. Adrian thinks in revenge dressed as refinement. They are all romantics. I am the only adult left in the room." Mara's jaw tightened. Elias could see the calculation in her face now, the mapping of distances, angles, moving bodies. 3 steps to the nearest crate, 6 to the hanging chain, 12 to Lena, too many to the men at the bay without making noise. Helena lifted a small black drive between 2 fingers. "The service van carried this," she said. "A partial account cache. Useful, but not enough. Rorik kept the real list where grief makes him feel holy. That was clever, I admit. I underestimated him." Lena stared at the drive, and then at Helena. "And now?" Helena slipped the drive into her coat pocket. "Now I decide which men believe they still need one another by dawn. That will determine who dies publicly, and who dies with paperwork." Elias felt a pulse of horror colder than fear. Helena had not been orbiting the violence. She had been converting it, cleaning it, translating it, turning male brutality into administrative permanence. Talia had died because Helena preferred collateral that looked manageable. Suddenly the legal language, the immediate leave order, the board's elegant severing of Elias from the hospital all reassembled into a single shape. Helena had been controlling the perimeter from the first day because institutions made cleaner weapons than guns. Mara leaned close to Elias's ear. "When I move, go straight to Lena. Don't think. Cut her loose and keep her low." He nodded once, though his heartbeat was pounding so hard he worried it might be visible. Before Mara could move, the armed man nearest the loading bay turned toward Helena. "Ward," he said. "We're getting nothing from Rorik's line now. Guy may have bolted." Helena did not look rattled. "No," she said. "He's waiting to see which side wins before offering his cooperation to the victor. Men like Daniel only run when they think the world still has edges." The second guard said, "And Sava?" Helena's mouth hardened. "Victor will go to Pier 9 because he still believes the doctor will crawl toward his guilt if given the opportunity. If Adrian has arranged otherwise, then Victor and Adrian may solve one problem for me by finally trying to kill each other in the same place." Lena lifted her head at that, the first spark of alarm cutting through the bruised exhaustion. "Elias won't go there," she said. Helena looked at her with interest. "And yet you still say his name as if there is meaning in it." "There is," Lena replied. "He was the only man in that chain who once made the wrong choice, for a reason other than appetite." Helena considered that with a curious, almost anthropological expression. "How disappointing for you, that intention does not alter outcome." The words struck Elias like a hand at the base of the throat, not because they were entirely wrong, but because he had spent years hiding inside the distinction. Mara moved then. She grabbed a loose metal hook hanging from the crate beside her and hurled it hard into the far aisle. It crashed through a stack of empty oil drums with a scream of steel. Both guards spun toward the sound, weapons up. Mara stepped into the open and fired twice in quick succession, controlled and brutal. One guard dropped instantly, shot through the shoulder and thigh before he could reorient. The second fired wildly, bullets shredding cardboard and showering dust from the rafters. Elias ran. He did not hear Helena's shout clearly, only the violent distortion of the hymn speaker toppling under gunfire as he crossed the pool of light toward Lena. She saw him, and for one unbelievable second her face changed, not into relief, but into fierce irritation. "About time," she rasped. He grabbed a utility knife from the work table and cut through the zip ties at her ankles. The guard near the loading bay swung toward them. Mara fired again, missed, then collided with Helena as Helena tried to reach into her coat. The two women crashed against a pallet rack, not graceful at all now, all sharp elbows and desperate leverage. Elias cut Lena's wrists free and pulled her out of the chair just as the second guard advanced, limping but still armed. Elias shoved Lena behind a crate and turned too late to avoid the blow. The man struck him across the temple with the pistol grip, and white pain exploded through his skull. He dropped to one knee. The guard raised the weapon again, but Lena, half falling, half throwing herself forward, slammed the metal chair into the man's legs. He staggered. Elias lunged on instinct, drove both hands into the man's wrist, and felt the joint crack as the gun discharged into the concrete. Mara reached them a second later and ended the fight with one precise shot that echoed through the warehouse like a hammer inside a church. Silence followed, ragged and short-lived. Helena had vanished. Mara spun, searching, but only saw the side door banging in the wind. "She's out," Mara said. "Leave her," Lena gasped. "She wants pursuit." Elias knelt beside Lena. Up close, she looked older than he remembered, and somehow harder, as if years had refined her face, not into fragility, but into a severe kind of endurance. The cracked bluestone necklace was gone. In its place, there was only a raw line at her throat where something had once rested. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I can survive insult better than concern," she muttered, though when she tried to stand, her legs nearly folded. He caught her under the arms. The contact shook him more than he expected. 5 years of abstraction ended the instant wait. Breath and pain became real in his hands. Mara was already on the phone, barking location and shots fired to Lynn, but her expression changed as she listened to the reply. "Say that again." Elias looked up. Mara's face had gone tight with a new dread. "Naomi never arrived at central intake," she said. Everything in Elias went cold. "What?" Mara held up a hand for silence, listening hard. Traffic cam caught her car turning off the river route near St. Alder Bridge. Then, signal loss. Lynn has units searching, but she didn't finish, because she didn't need to. The air in the warehouse changed shape around the omission. Elias stood too quickly, almost losing balance from the head blow. "No." Lena gripped his coat with surprising force. "Listen to me," she said. He looked down at her, torn between movement and comprehension. "Adrian did this," she said. "Not Helena. Helena wants evidence and survival. Adrian wants structure. He wants all the debts arranged where he can admire them." Mara ended the call. "Pier 9 just reported gunfire," she said. "Multiple vehicles. One confirmed male down, identity unknown. Victor may already be engaged." Elias stared at her, the options collapsing and multiplying at once. "Naomi has the ledger. If Adrian took her, then yes. Then he has everything." Lena shook her head, breathing through pain. "No, not everything. Naomi is your sister. That matters." Elias almost shouted at the absurdity. "How is that useful?" Lena met his eyes with a steadiness that cut through the panic. "Because Adrian doesn't just trap bodies. He stages recognition. He wants people to meet themselves in the wrong mirror. He took her because she carries your father's unfinished guilt and your unfinished loyalty in one package. He will not kill her quickly. He will force a tableau first." Mara looked toward the open side door, then back at Lena. "Where?" Lena swallowed, then said, "The old dry dock annex below Pier 9. That's where Victor used to inventory unsanctioned cargo before the port cameras were modernized. Adrian would know it. He liked places that smell of rust and confession." Elias was already moving toward the exit. Mara caught his arm. "Think." He jerked free. "No. I thought for 5 years. And if this is another diversion?" she demanded. He looked at her, blood from his temple sliding down his cheek. "Then I lose the wrong thing on the correct instinct for once." The words hung between them. Mara exhaled sharply, decision hardening. "Fine. We all go." Lena made a grim sound that might have been agreement or pain. Sirens were beginning to rise somewhere far off along the river. Mara grabbed the black drive Helena had dropped during the struggle, stuffed it into her pocket, and together they left the warehouse through the side door into wind and mist. The drive to Pier 9 felt less like travel than descent. Mara commandeered the nearest intact van from the loading yard. Elias sat in the back with Lena, pressing a stolen medkit compress against the cut at her brow, while she gave directions in short bursts between clenched teeth. "There's a drainage road behind the customs sheds," she said. If Adrian sealed the main gate, use that. Elias cleaned blood from her face with hands steadier than the rest of him. Why did you contact Talia? He asked, the question dragging itself out despite everything. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Because she noticed the archive discrepancy and didn't panic like a bureaucrat, she said, she asked whether the missing clinic forms looked like coercion or fear. I told her sometimes those are the same thing. She said she knew a doctor who believed they weren't. Elias looked down. Lena's voice softened, but only barely. I was angry with you for years. Then I learned anger is lazy if it never updates. You were not innocent, Elias. But you were also not built like the rest of them. Talia saw that before I did. The words offered no absolution. They did something harder. They restored proportion. Talia had not died because Elias alone had poisoned the world. She had died because she stepped toward something dangerous, with eyes open, trying to help someone who had already learned too well how danger organizes silence. By the time they reached the custom sheds, the night near Pier 9 was fractured by intermittent flashes in the fog. Somewhere ahead, engines idled and then stopped. Somewhere else, men shouted. Mara killed the van lights and guided them down the drainage road, Lena indicated, tires bumping through puddles and broken gravel until the dry dock annex came into view, a low concrete structure half sunk beside the river wall, its roof ribbed with rust and its side doors standing open like a mouth. Smoke drifted from somewhere nearby. That's not Adrian's style, Lena murmured. No, Mara said. That's aftermath. They got out and moved toward the annex. One body lay near the outer wall, face down in shallow water. Mara rolled him with her foot. Not Victor, one of his men, judging by the tattoo beneath the ear. Another body lay near a forklift, younger, civilian clothes, shot through the chest. Not Adrian either. Elias stepped over blood, diluted pink by mist, and felt the moral geometry of the night turning one last time, no longer branching, but narrowing toward something inevitable. Inside the annex, work lamps illuminated a space that had once stored ship parts, and now held only rusted scaffolding, chains, and a central platform built from stacked pallets. On that platform, Naomi sat bound to a chair, a bruise darkening along one cheek but alive, very much alive, glaring with such incandescent hatred that Elias nearly laughed from sheer relief before he saw the men around her. Victor Sava stood near the river-facing opening, older than the photograph Mara had shown him but unmistakable, his heavy face marked by sleepless fury. Adrian stood opposite him, coat dark with rain, pistol loose at his side, calm as ever. Between them, on a crate, lay the ledger from Naomi's bag, and a second object wrapped in oilcloth. Helena was there too, farther back near a steel support beam, one arm bandaged from Mara's earlier shot, eyes bright and cold. For one suspended second, no one moved. Then Victor's gaze landed on Elias, and a smile of pure exhausted hatred spread slowly across his face. There he is, Victor said. The surgeon who keeps opening graves. Naomi twisted in the chair. You took your time, she snapped at Elias, because fear in their family had always preferred sarcasm to tears. Adrian inclined his head slightly, as if welcoming honored guests to a formal dinner. Excellent, he said. Now perhaps we can stop fragmenting the evening. Mara stepped into the open with her weapon raised. Release her. Helena laughed softly. Listen to that confidence from a woman with one gun and several impossible priorities. Lena moved beside Elias into the light, and for the first time Adrian's composure altered. Not much, a tightening at the mouth, a flicker in the eyes, but enough to reveal the engine beneath the elegance. You were supposed to remain instructive, he said to her. Lena's swollen face managed something close to a smile. I was always a poor student of men. Victor looked from Lena to Adrian and then to Helena, disgust thick in his voice. This is what happens when everyone in a conspiracy starts wanting artistic endings. He kicked the oilcloth bundle off the crate. It hit the floor and unwrapped partially, revealing stacks of account printouts, old manifests, and what looked like a portable drive bank. There, he said. The list, the proofs, the ghosts. Take your pick. I'm done negotiating sentiment. Mara kept her aim steady. Then drop your gun. Victor's laugh was raw. Detective, every person here has already chosen what matters more. The only thing left is whether they admit it. Adrian turned his pistol lazily toward Victor, not firing, only redirecting the center of gravity. You sound tired, he said. That's dangerous at your age. Victor's eyes blazed. You think this ends with you? No, Adrian replied. I think it ends with arrangement. Naomi spoke then, startling all of them with the force of her voice. For the record, every man in this room is less original than he believes. Elias saw Adrian actually blink at that. Helena's expression tightened, perhaps because Naomi had said man, and included the logic Helena served if not Helena herself. Mara took one step sideways, improving her angle on Naomi's restraints. "Naomi," she said. "When I say drop, you drop the chair left." Naomi nodded once. Adrian caught it. "Ah," he murmured, still trying to save everyone through choreography. He lifted his pistol toward Naomi's head. Elias moved before thought could intervene. "Wait." The word cracked through the annex and stopped the next second from happening. Adrian looked at him with faint curiosity. "Yes, doctor?" Elias stepped farther into the open. Mara hissed his name, but he kept moving until he stood between the platform and the entrance, exposed to all of them. He could feel every gaze on him, every consequence gathering. The old instinct would have been to plead for the hostage, to offer himself, to bargain from guilt. Instead, he heard Lena's voice from the tape. And Naomi's in the basement, and Brother Ansel's at the grave, and even Father Tom's from years before. Mercy and fear dressed as mercy, purity as refusal to own choice. He took a breath and looked directly at Adrian. "You keep staging this as moral intelligence," he said. "But it's vanity. You don't want justice. You want authorship. You want to be the one who arranges the dead so your survival means something." Adrian's face went still. Elias turned to Victor. "And you're worse. You call blood loyalty because without it you're only a frightened accountant with hired men." Victor's lip curled. Elias looked finally at Helena. "And you built a career translating these men's appetites into respectable language. Talia Mercer died because paperwork is cleaner when a witness becomes collateral." Something flashed in Helena's eyes then, the briefest raw thing, either fury or recognition. Elias did not stop. He looked at Naomi, then at Lena, then at Mara, and the next words felt less like courage than exhaustion made honest. "I made the first compromise because I could not bear letting one person die in front of me. That compromise fed all of you. I am not doing that again." Adrian's pistol remained on Naomi, but his attention had shifted fully now, drawn where Elias needed it. "Meaning?" Adrian asked softly. Elias pointed to the oilcloth bundle, meaning the evidence goes public even if no one here walks out with the version they want. Mara understood first. He saw it in her eyes. She dropped low and fired in the same instant. Elias lunged for the nearest work lamp. The shot severed Naomi's chair restraints rather than her skull. Naomi hurled herself left with the chair exactly as instructed. Elias ripped the lamp from its stand and threw it into the oilcloth bundle. Sparks burst. The soaked papers did not ignite at once, but the drive bank cracked open, showering exposed circuitry. Helena fired at him. The bullet tore through his shoulder and spun him sideways into the platform support. Pain went white and immediate. Victor roared and shot toward Adrian. Adrian shot back. The annex exploded into motion. Mara hit Helena in the leg. Helena collapsed but still fired from the floor. Lena, somehow upright through sheer fury, seized a loose chain hanging from the scaffolding and swung it hard into Victor's gun arm. Naomi crawled free of the chair and kicked the oilcloth bundle toward the riverside drainage grate just as a stray bullet shattered the overhead floodlight. Darkness dropped in stripes and smoke. Elias, half kneeling, half falling, saw Adrian advance through it like a figure stripped down to intent. Adrian raised his pistol again. Not at Naomi now, not at Lena, but at the bundle sliding toward the grate. He was going to destroy it rather than lose control of it. Mara was pinned behind the support beam. Helena was down, but not neutralized. Victor was bleeding from the throat and still trying to stand. Elias did the only thing left available to his body. He threw himself at Adrian. They hit the concrete together, pistol discharging into the ceiling. Adrian was stronger than Elias, remembered any man from that old night having the right to be. Or maybe Elias was simply weaker now, blood pouring warm down his side. They grappled in the smoke while the annex rang with shouted names and choking metal echoes. Adrian got one hand around Elias's wounded shoulder and pressed hard. Elias nearly blacked out. Adrian leaned close, voice stripped of elegance at last. "You still choose bodies over systems." Elias, gasping, answered through his teeth. "No, I'm choosing interruption." He slammed Adrian's hand against the concrete until the pistol skidded away. Somewhere to the right, Mara fired again. Helena screamed. Victor staggered toward the river opening and disappeared from sight with a splash below, either falling or choosing water over handcuffs. Naomi, face bloodied and wild, snatched the portable drive bank from the floor and threw it across the annex to Lena, who caught it against her chest and collapsed with the impact. Adrian saw that movement and made one final desperate lunge, not for Elias now, but for Lena. Mara's shot took him through the back. He stopped as if surprised by gravity, then dropped to his knees. For the first time all night, silence arrived in something close to its natural form. Adrian swayed, turned his head, and looked at Elias with a gaze emptied of theater. Did it help? he asked. Elias did not understand at first. Then he did. The surgery, the survival, the years of consequence. He answered honestly because there was no use for anything else. No, he said. Adrian gave the smallest nod, as if confirming a private theorem, and fell forward onto the concrete. The sirens that followed sounded distant, inevitable, and much too late. Mara kicked away Helena's weapon and cuffed her with hands that shook only after the second wrist was secured. Helena, pale with blood loss, managed one bitter laugh. You think institutions won't absorb this? She whispered. They absorb everything. Mara leaned close enough for Helena alone to hear. Not when I choose where the leak starts. Naomi came to Elias first, dropping beside him on the floor while Lena clutched the drive bank like a relic and tried not to pass out. Stay awake, Naomi said, pressing both hands over the wound in his shoulder, with no concern for gentleness. I would prefer not to explain this to your ghost. Elias tried to laugh and failed. You always were kind under pressure. Her face broke for the first time then. Not into tears exactly, but into something far rarer from her. Naked terror. Don't make me be the competent one again, she said. The words entered him more deeply than the bullet had. He looked at her and saw the cost of every year she had carried family wreckage under the name of practicality. I'm sorry, he whispered. Naomi shook her head violently. No, not this way. Not with apology as anesthesia. Mara knelt on his other side now, already opening the medkit. Her voice clipped but softer than Elias had heard it before. You're not dying unless it becomes personally annoying for me, she said. Lena dragged herself closer and held out the drive bank with trembling hands. Take it, she said to Mara. Chain of custody now, before anyone gets inventive. Mara took it and looked at Lena with a respect that had finally become unguarded. You did good. Lena gave a hollow little smile. I did old damage in a more useful direction. Blue lights flashed across the annex walls as police units flooded the pier above. Officers began shouting commands, identifying friend from threat, securing bodies, calling for ambulances. Somewhere in the confusion, someone reported a male suspect pulled from the water downstream with a pulse too weak to guarantee anything. Victor, perhaps. Or another ghost, not yet ready to admit its name. Elias lay on the cold concrete between his sister and the detective, and the woman he had once saved wrongly. And for the first time since the hospital corridor, he understood that resolution was not the same thing as cleansing. Talia would still be dead by morning. Father Tom would still be buried. Their father would still have drunk himself into silence while trying and failing to outrun what paper had shown him. None of that reversed, because one drive now existed in police hands, and 3 monsters had finally turned on one another in the open. But some machinery had been interrupted, some sequence broken. Naomi kept pressure on the wound while the paramedics ran in with a stretcher. Lena, before they carried her away, looked back at Elias one last time. You were right about one thing years ago, she said faintly. He frowned through the pain. What? Saving a life matters. She paused, breathing hard. It just isn't enough by itself. Then they took her toward the waiting ambulance. Dawn arrived gray and pitiless over the harbor by the time Elias regained full awareness in a trauma bay 2 floors above the emergency department, where he had spent so many years working on other damaged bodies. The irony was not lost on him. Neither was the absence of certain sounds. No frantic cover-up, no private security flood, no hospital counsel at the foot of the bed with neutral language and fresh forms. The news had broken too widely, too quickly. Mara had kept her promise. Port corruption, charity laundering, homicide links, senior hospital counsel arrested, influential donor under investigation. Anonymous internal source leaks had multiplied through every outlet before sunrise. Institutions were still trying to absorb it, of course. They always would. But absorption required time, and public disgust had finally outrun private management. Naomi sat by the window, asleep in a chair, shoes off, legal pad in her lap. Mara stood at the door with a paper cup of coffee and a face that looked carved from the previous day. Lena made it through surgery, she said quietly. Helena's alive, and already lawyering through blood loss. Adrian is dead. Victor's in custody under guard, though if he lives long enough to testify, half the city will develop sudden travel plans. Elias let the information settle slowly. And the drive? Mara held his gaze, real, comprehensive, ugly enough that Federal will take over whether we invite them or not. He nodded. Relief did not arrive cleanly. It came tangled with grief, fatigue, and the knowledge that consequences would keep unfolding long after the dramatic center of the night had ended. I'm still suspended, he said after a moment. Mara almost smiled. You were arrested adjacent in a corruption case, stole a truck, broke into at least one property, tampered with evidence by setting part of it on fire, and got shot in a dry dock. So, yes, I think your administrative status remains complicated. Naomi woke at that and gave him a tired, vicious look. Do not mistake survival for rehabilitation. He met her gaze. I won't. She studied him, perhaps searching for the old evasions, then slowly nodded. It was not forgiveness. It was permission to continue breathing in the same moral universe without insulting it further. Mara set the coffee down. Internal affairs will want statements. So will federal. So will a dozen lawyers. This does not get simpler from here. Elias looked at Naomi, then at the morning light over the harbor, thin and colorless and stubborn. It wasn't supposed to, he said. And that, finally, was the truest thing available. Not peace, not redemption. Only an end to one arrangement and the beginning of the work demanded by whatever came after, with trust still cracked, loyalty still costly, grief still active, and responsibility no longer something he could outsource to intention. Outside the hospital window, the city kept moving, indifferent and newly exposed, while inside the room, the three of them sat with the ruins and the surviving evidence, and the knowledge that no clean solution had ever existed, only better and worse forms of courage, chosen too late or just in time.